The words hit me like a slap across the face. Mom, honestly, Tiffany deserves those pieces more than you do. You never even wear them anymore. My name is Evelyn, I'm 58 years old, and I never thought my own son would try to take away the one thing that connected me to 3 generations of strong women in my family. I stood there in my living room, holding the velvet jewelry box that contained my grandmother's pearl necklace, my mother's diamond engagement ring, and the emerald bracelet my late husband gave me on our 20th anniversary. These weren't just pieces of jewelry. They were my history, my legacy, my connection to the women who came before me and raised me to be strong. But my son David didn't see it that way. At 32, he had always been my pride and joy, the boy I raised alone after his father passed when David was just 15. I worked 2 jobs to put him through college, sacrificed vacations and new clothes for myself so he could have everything he needed. I thought I had raised him to understand the value of family, of respect, of honoring the people who came before us. Apparently, I was wrong. David, these belong to your grandmother and great-grandmother, I said, my voice steady despite the hurt blooming in my chest. They're family heirlooms, they're meant to stay in the family. Exactly, he said, straightening his tie. He had always been particular about his appearance, especially since he started making good money at the accounting firm. Tiffany is family now. She's my wife, and frankly, she appreciates fine jewelry more than you do. When's the last time you wore any of those pieces? The question stung because there was some truth to it. Since retirement, I rarely had occasions that called for such formal jewelry, but that wasn't the point, and David knew it. Or at least, the David I raised would have known it. That's not what this is about, and you know it, I replied, closing the jewelry box with a soft click. These pieces have stories, they have meaning. Your great-grandmother wore this pearl necklace to church every Sunday for 40 years. Your grandmother wore this ring through the Depression, through World War II, through raising 6 children. This bracelet was the last gift your father gave me before he got sick. David rolled his eyes, actually rolled his eyes, like I was some sentimental old woman bothering him with pointless stories. Mom, you're being dramatic. They're just things. Beautiful things, sure, but things nonetheless. Tiffany would actually wear them. She goes to charity galas, business dinners, social events. She moves in circles where jewelry like that would be appreciated and seen. And I don't? The words came out sharper than I intended. Well, no offense, but what do? You go to the grocery store, you tend your garden, you watch your shows. It's not like you're attending the symphony or anything. Each word was like a small knife. This was my son, the boy I had rocked to sleep, helped with homework, cheered on at baseball games, held when he cried over his first heartbreak. This was the man I had stood beside at his wedding just 2 years ago, tears of pride streaming down my face as he promised to love and honor Tiffany. But now, standing in the living room of the house where I had raised him, he was talking to me like I was some insignificant old woman whose life held no value, no beauty, no meaning worth recognizing. Your father worked overtime for 6 months to buy me that bracelet, I said quietly. He presented it to me at our anniversary dinner and told me it was the color of my eyes when I laughed. He died 3 months later. For just a moment, David's expression softened. I saw a flicker of the boy I raised, the one who used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared him. But then his phone buzzed, and he glanced at it, and the moment passed. Look, Mom, I know these things have sentimental value to you, but Tiffany really has her heart set on wearing Grandma's ring to the Hartwell Foundation Gala next month. It would mean a lot to her. And to me. Then she can wear it for the evening, I said. She can borrow it. It's not the same thing. David's voice took on that petulant tone I remembered from his teenage years. She wants to know that it's hers, that she's really part of the family, that you accept her. I do accept her. I welcomed her into this family with open arms. But accepting someone doesn't mean giving them everything they want. Everything they want? Mom, come on. Tiffany doesn't ask for much. That wasn't true, and we both knew it. In the 2 years since David married Tiffany, she had made it clear that she found our family traditions quaint at best, embarrassing at worst. She had convinced David to skip the last 2 Christmas dinners at my house, claiming her family's celebrations were more sophisticated. She had rolled her eyes when I showed her photo albums from David's childhood, making comments about how different things were back then. She had even suggested that David sell the old family piano because it didn't match their modern decor. But I had held my tongue. I had smiled and nodded and tried to be the welcoming mother-in-law. Even when every instinct told me that Tiffany saw our family history as something to be discarded and replaced with her own vision of what David's life should look like. "Where is Tiffany today?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "She's at her yoga class. Then she's meeting her mother for lunch at that new place downtown." Of course she was. In the 2 years I had known Tiffany, I could count on one hand the number of times she had visited me without David having to insist on it. She was always busy with her activities, her friends, her social obligations, but she certainly wasn't too busy to send David over to ask for my jewelry. "Did she send you here to ask me for this?" I asked directly. David had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. We talked about it. She mentioned how beautiful the pieces were and how much she would love to wear them. I thought it made sense. "You thought it made sense to ask your mother to give away her most precious possessions to someone who can't even be bothered to visit her?" "That's not fair, Mom. Tiffany has a busy schedule and you know she's been trying to get pregnant. The doctor said stress isn't good for that." I wanted to ask what stress Tiffany was under, given that she didn't work and spent her days at yoga classes and lunch dates, but I bit my tongue. Again. "David, sit down," I said, gesturing to the couch where we used to read bedtime stories together. He glanced at his watch, an expensive piece that I was sure Tiffany had picked out. "I really can't stay long. I told Tiffany I'd meet her at 2. This will just take a minute." Reluctantly, he perched on the edge of the couch, looking like he was ready to bolt at any second. I sat across from him, the jewelry box still in my hands. "Do you remember when you were 12 and you broke Mrs. Peterson's window with your baseball?" "Mom, what does this have to do with anything?" "Do you remember what I told you when you wanted to just run away and pretend it didn't happen?" David sighed. "You said that our actions have consequences, and that taking responsibility is what separates good people from people who just look out for themselves." "That's right. And do you remember what you did?" "I went over and apologized and offered to work in her garden until I had earned enough to pay for the window." "And how did that feel?" "Good, I guess. Mrs. Peterson ended up becoming like a grandmother to me. She taught me how to plant tomatoes." "She did. And she left you her recipe box when she passed, remember? Because she said you were the most responsible young man she knew." David shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I don't see what this has to do with the jewelry." "It has everything to do with the jewelry, David. These pieces represent generations of women who took responsibility, who worked hard, who sacrificed for their families. Your great-grandmother cleaned houses during the Depression to keep food on the table. Your grandmother worked in a factory during the war while her husband was overseas. I worked 2 jobs to raise you after your father died. I know all of this." "Do you? Because right now, you're asking me to hand over the symbols of all that work, all that sacrifice, to someone who has never had to struggle for anything in her life." David's jaw tightened. "That's not Tiffany's fault, and it doesn't make her less deserving." "Deserving of what exactly?" "She didn't earn these pieces. She didn't know the women who wore them. She doesn't understand their stories or their significance." "She's trying to understand. She's trying to be part of the family. By taking things that don't belong to her, they could belong to her. You can make them belong to her." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and wondered where I had gone wrong. When had he become someone who thought love could be bought with gifts? When had he started measuring a person's worth by their social calendar? What if I said no? I asked quietly. David blinked. What do you mean? What if I said I'm not ready to pass these pieces on yet? What if I said I want to keep them a little longer? Mom, you're not going to live forever. The casual cruelty of the statement took my breath away. Excuse me? I just mean, what's the point of holding on to them if they're just going to sit in a box? At least if Tiffany has them, they'll be worn and appreciated. And when I die, she'll inherit them anyway, so why not just cut out the middleman? David looked genuinely confused, like he couldn't understand why his logic was hurtful. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? I just meant that it would make Tiffany happy, and when someone you love would be made happy by something that's just sitting in a drawer, why wouldn't you want to make them happy? Because, David, these pieces aren't just sitting in a drawer. They're in my drawer, in my home, where I look at them and remember the women who wore them and the love they represented. They make me happy. They connect me to my history, to your history, to the story of where we came from. But you never wear them. I don't have to wear them to love them. I don't have to take them to galas to treasure them. David stood up, frustration clear on his face. This is exactly what Tiffany said would happen. She said you'd get all sentimental and refuse to see reason. She said that, did she? She said older people sometimes get too attached to things and can't see the bigger picture. The words hit me like a physical blow. Older people. Like I was some doddering fool clinging to worthless trinkets. And what, in Tiffany's opinion, is the bigger picture? That we're a family now, and families share things. That hoarding jewelry doesn't do anyone any good. Hoarding? My voice came out as barely a whisper. You know what I mean. No, David, I don't think I do. Explain to me how keeping my own jewelry, in my own home, is hoarding. David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from when he was frustrated as a child. But back then, his frustration came from trying to understand math homework or learning to ride a bike. Now it came from his impatience with his own mother. Look, forget I said hoarding. That was the wrong word. I just think that when you have beautiful things that could make someone else happy, and that someone else's family, it's selfish to keep them locked away. Selfish. I repeated the word, tasting its bitterness. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. You meant exactly that. You think I'm a selfish old woman who should hand over her precious possessions to make your wife happy. She's not just my wife, she's your daughter-in-law. A daughter-in-law who has made it clear that she has no interest in being my daughter. A daughter-in-law who avoids family gatherings, rolls her eyes at family stories, and apparently talks about me like I'm some unreasonable old woman who doesn't know what's best. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time Tiffany called me? When was the last time she asked how I was doing? When was the last time she showed any interest in my life, beyond what I might be able to give her? David's silence was answer enough. Your father and I saved for years to buy this house, I continued. We painted every room ourselves, planted every flower in the garden, fixed every squeaky board. When he got sick, I took care of him right here in our bedroom until the day he died. After the funeral, I sat in this living room and wondered how I was going to go on without him. Do you know what got me through those dark days? David shook his head, looking uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. These pieces of jewelry, touching my grandmother's pearls and remembering how she used to tell me stories about her own mother. Holding my mother's ring and remembering how she and my father danced in the kitchen on Sunday mornings, wearing your father's bracelet and feeling like he was still with me somehow. I opened the jewelry box and lifted out the pearl necklace. The pearls were lustrous and perfect, each one carefully matched by my grandmother decades ago. Your great-grandmother bought these pearls one at a time, I said. Every time your great-grandfather got a bonus at the mill, she would go to the jewelry store and buy one more pearl. It took her 3 years to get enough for a full necklace. She told me that each pearl represented a dream she had for her family, a hope for the future. I set the necklace down carefully and picked up my mother's ring. This ring was the only valuable thing your grandmother owned during the Depression. 3 different times, she almost sold it to buy food for the family. 3 different times, your grandfather worked extra shifts, took odd jobs, did whatever he had to do to make sure she didn't have to give it up. He said a woman should never have to sacrifice her dreams for survival. Finally, I lifted the emerald bracelet, the stones catching the afternoon light streaming through the window. And this bracelet represents 20 years of marriage to the best man I ever knew. Your father saved up for months to buy it. He told me later that he wanted to give me something as beautiful as the life we had built together. I looked up at David, hoping to see some recognition in his eyes, some understanding of what these pieces meant. Instead, I saw impatience. Mom, those are beautiful stories, but that doesn't change the fact that the jewelry is just sitting here not being used. Not being used for what? For impressing people at charity galas, for showing off at business dinners, for being appreciated, for being part of a life that celebrates beauty and elegance. And my life doesn't celebrate beauty and elegance? That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying, David? Because it sounds like you're saying that my quiet life, my simple pleasures, my connection to family history, aren't valuable enough to deserve these pieces. I'm saying that Tiffany would wear them, she would take care of them, she would make sure they're seen and admired by strangers, at events where no one knows or cares about the stories behind them. Does it matter if strangers know the stories? The question broke my heart. Yes, David, it matters. It matters because the stories are what make them precious. Without the stories, they're just expensive accessories. David glanced at his watch again. I really need to go. Tiffany is expecting me. Of course she is. So what should I tell her about the jewelry? I looked down at the pieces in my hands, these tangible connections to the women who had shaped my life, who had loved me, who had passed down not just their jewelry but their strength, their resilience, their wisdom. Tell her no, I said quietly. Mom. Tell her no, David. Tell her that these pieces will be passed down when the time is right, to someone who understands their value beyond their price tag. David's face flushed. This is ridiculous. You're being completely unreasonable. I'm being protective of my family's history. Tiffany is part of this family. Then she can start acting like it. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I can't believe you're being so stubborn about this. Do you have any idea how much this means to her? Do you have any idea how much it means to me? It's just jewelry, Mom. The words hung in the air between us like a chasm that couldn't be crossed. Just jewelry. 3 generations of love, sacrifice, and dreams reduced to just jewelry by my own son. Get out, I said quietly. What? I said, get out. If you can't understand why these pieces matter to me, if you can't respect my decision, if you think I'm just a selfish old woman hoarding meaningless trinkets, then get out of my house. Mom, you're overreacting. Am I? You come into my home and demand that I give away my most precious possessions. You dismiss my feelings, my memories, my connection to these pieces. You call me selfish and unreasonable and stubborn. You reduce 3 generations of family history to just jewelry, and you think I'm overreacting? David stood there for a moment, looking genuinely shocked that I was standing up to him. In all his 32 years, I had never asked him to leave my house. I had never raised my voice to him in anger. I had always been the understanding, accommodating mother who put his needs above my own. But not today. Today, something inside me had shifted. Today, I realized that in trying to be a good mother, I had somehow raised a son who thought his wants were more important than my feelings. Fine, he said, his voice cold. I'll tell Tiffany that you refused, but don't expect us to keep coming around if you're going to be like this. Like what, David? Like someone who values her family history? Like someone who has feelings that matter? Like someone who expects basic respect from her own son? Like someone who puts objects before people? I'm not putting objects before people. I'm putting my own feelings before your wife's wants. There's a difference. David walked toward the door, then turned back. You know what, Mom? Maybe Tiffany was right. Maybe you are too old to understand what really matters anymore. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't let him see how much they hurt. I stood there, holding my jewelry box, watching my son walk out of my house without looking back. After the door slammed shut, I sat down heavily on the couch and let the tears come. Not tears of sadness exactly, but tears of disappointment so deep they felt like grief. This was my son, the boy I had poured my life into, the man I thought I had raised to be kind and respectful and understanding. But the man who had just left my house was none of those things. He was entitled and dismissive and cruel. He was someone who thought his wife's social calendar was more important than his mother's emotional well-being. He was someone who could look at family heirlooms and see nothing but expensive accessories waiting to be shown off. I opened the jewelry box again and touched each piece gently. The pearls were still warm from my hands. The diamond still caught the light the same way it had for 70 years. The emeralds still reminded me of the love in my husband's eyes when he fastened the bracelet around my wrist. These pieces weren't just jewelry. They were love made tangible. They were proof that I had been cherished, that my family had history and meaning and value. They were symbols of women who had worked and sacrificed and dreamed, who had passed down not just their possessions but their strength. And I would not let them be reduced to party accessories for a woman who couldn't even be bothered to visit me unless she wanted something. But as I sat there in my quiet house, I realized that David's words had revealed something I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. He didn't see me as someone whose feelings mattered. He saw me as an obstacle to his wife's happiness, an unreasonable old woman who was standing in the way of what they wanted. And if that's how he truly saw me, then our relationship was already broken in ways that went far deeper than a disagreement about jewelry. The phone rang later that evening, and I knew it would be David before I answered. Mom, I'm sorry about earlier. I said some things I didn't mean. Did you, David? Or did you finally say what you really think? I don't think you're too old to understand things. I was just frustrated. Frustrated that I wouldn't give you what you wanted. Frustrated that we can't seem to communicate about this. We're communicating just fine. You're asking me to give away my jewelry and I'm saying no. The communication seems perfectly clear to me. There was a long pause. Tiffany is really upset. I'm sorry to hear that. She was looking forward to wearing Grandma's ring to the gala. She can still wear it. She can borrow it for the evening. It's not the same thing, Mom. She wants to feel like she really belongs in the family. Belonging in a family isn't about jewelry, David. It's about love and respect and showing up for each other. When has Tiffany ever shown up for me? She's busy. Everyone's busy. But people make time for what matters to them. Clearly, I don't matter to her. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time she asked about my health? When was the last time she called just to chat? When was the last time she showed any interest in my life that didn't involve what I could do for her? David was quiet for so long, I thought he might have hung up. She's trying, he finally said. Is she? Or are you making excuses for her? Why can't you just trust me on this? Why can't you trust that I know what's best for my marriage? Because what's best for your marriage shouldn't come at the expense of what's meaningful to me. Because a good marriage should make you more caring, not less. Because the man I raised would understand why family heirlooms matter without having to be convinced. I do understand. No, David, you don't. If you understood, you wouldn't have asked me to give them away. If you understood, you wouldn't have dismissed my feelings. If you understood, you wouldn't have called them just jewelry. Another long pause. So what happens now? He asked. Now you decide what kind of son you want to be, and what kind of husband, and what kind of man. What's that supposed to mean? It means that if you want to have a relationship with me, you need to start treating me with respect. It means that if you want me to welcome Tiffany into this family, she needs to start acting like she wants to be part of it. It means that family heirlooms stay in the family until I decide otherwise. And if we can't accept that, then I guess you'll have to decide what's more important to you, your wife's wants or your mother's feelings. I hung up the phone before he could respond, my hands shaking slightly. In 58 years of life, I had never felt so alone. But I had also never felt so clear about what I would and wouldn't accept. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I put on my mother's diamond ring, my grandmother's pearl necklace, and my husband's emerald bracelet. I looked at myself in the mirror, these beautiful pieces catching the morning light, and I remembered what it felt like to feel valuable, to feel worthy of beautiful things. Then I got dressed in my best outfit and drove to the bank. It was time to make sure that no one would ever be able to take these pieces away from me again. The bank manager, a kind woman named Patricia, who had been handling my accounts for 15 years, looked surprised when I walked in wearing all 3 pieces of jewelry at once. "Mrs. Henderson," she said warmly, "you look absolutely radiant today. Those pieces are stunning." "Thank you, Patricia. They belong to my mother and grandmother. I've been thinking it's time I wore them more often instead of keeping them hidden away." We sat in her office and I explained what I needed: a safety deposit box for the jewelry, with very specific instructions about who could and couldn't access it. Patricia listened carefully, occasionally nodding, her expression growing more serious as I detailed my requirements. "I want to make absolutely certain that only I can access this box," I said. "No one else should be able to claim these pieces, regardless of what they might say about family relationships or expectations." "Of course, Mrs. Henderson. The safety deposit box will require your signature and your key. No one else will have access unless you specifically add them to the account, which would require your presence and written authorization." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. These pieces would be safe, protected, valued for what they truly were rather than coveted for their social utility. After completing the paperwork, I carefully placed each piece in the safety deposit box, whispering a small prayer of protection over them. My grandmother's pearls nestled in their velvet compartment, my mother's ring sparkled one last time in the fluorescent light, and my husband's bracelet seemed to wink at me as I tucked it safely away. On the drive home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: peace. My jewelry was secure, my boundaries were clear, and for the first time since David's visit, I felt like I had some control over my own life. That peace lasted exactly 3 hours. I was in my garden, deadheading the roses and enjoying the afternoon sunshine, when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. 2 car doors. I looked up to see David's silver sedan and a red convertible I recognized as Tiffany's. My stomach tightened. David had never brought Tiffany here without calling first, and certainly not the day after our argument. This felt like an ambush. I stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from my gardening gloves, and walked around to the front of the house. David was standing by his car, looking uncomfortable, while Tiffany marched up my front walkway like she owned the place. At 28, Tiffany was undeniably beautiful. Tall and thin with perfectly styled blonde hair. Designer clothes that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. And the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money or acceptance. But there was something cold about her beauty, something calculating in her blue eyes that had always made me uneasy. "Evelyn," she said, not bothering with any greeting. "We need to talk." "Hello, Tiffany. David." I nodded to my son, who still hadn't moved from beside his car. "This is unexpected." "David told me about your conversation yesterday," Tiffany continued, stopping just a few feet in front of me. "I have to say, I'm disappointed." "Are you?" "I thought we had a better relationship than this. I thought you understood how important it is for family members to support each other." I almost laughed at the irony. Support each other? When exactly have you supported me, Tiffany? Her perfectly glossed lips tightened. "I've been nothing but respectful to you. I've included you in our wedding planning. I've invited you to family events. You've invited me to events and then made it clear that my presence was an obligation rather than a joy. You've listened to my stories with barely concealed boredom. You've suggested that David distance himself from family traditions that you find outdated." "That's not true." "Isn't it? What was it you said about Christmas dinner last year? That it was quaint but exhausting. What about when I showed you David's baby pictures and you said it was sweet how different things were back then?" Tiffany's cheeks flushed slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I never meant to offend you." "But you did offend me, repeatedly. And now you want me to reward that behavior by giving you my family's most precious heirlooms. They're just sitting in your house, not being used." There it was. The same dismissive attitude that David had inherited, or perhaps learned from his wife. "They're not just sitting anywhere, Tiffany. They're in my home, where I can see them and touch them and remember the women who wore them. They're exactly where they belong." "But I could wear them. I could show them off properly. I move in social circles where jewelry like that would be appreciated." "And I don't?" "Well, no offense, but what do? You garden and watch television and go to the grocery store. It's not like you're attending important events where fine jewelry would be appropriate." The casual cruelty of her words was breathtaking. I looked over at David, hoping to see some recognition of how hurtful his wife was being, but he was staring at the ground like a scolded child. "So because my life is quiet, it's less valuable? Because I don't attend charity galas, I don't deserve to own beautiful things?" "That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying, Tiffany? Explain to me why you think you deserve jewelry that has been in my family for 3 generations." "Because I'm David's wife. Because I'm going to be the mother of his children. Because these pieces should go to someone who will honor them by wearing them and caring for them properly." "Honor them? You don't even know the stories behind them. You don't know what they represent or why they matter." "I know they're beautiful and valuable and currently wasted on someone who never wears them." I felt something snap inside me, a thread of patience that had been stretched too thin for too long. "Get off my property," I said quietly. "Excuse me?" "I said, get off my property, both of you." David finally looked up. "Mom, we just want to talk." "No, David, she doesn't want to talk. She wants to bully me into giving her what she wants. She wants to insult my life and dismiss my feelings and make me feel small enough that I'll hand over my jewelry just to make her go away." "That's not," Tiffany started. "Yes, it is. That's exactly what this is. You've decided that my quiet life isn't worth respecting, that my connection to these pieces doesn't matter, that your social calendar is more important than my family history." "You're being ridiculous," Tiffany said, her mask of politeness finally slipping completely. "They're just old pieces of jewelry that you never wear. I'm offering to take care of them and actually use them instead of letting them sit in a drawer gathering dust." "Gathering dust? Gathering dust?" My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. These pieces represent 70 years of love and sacrifice and family history. My grandmother worked her fingers to the bone to buy those pearls. My mother nearly sold her engagement ring to feed her family during the Depression. My husband saved for months to buy me that bracelet because he wanted to give me something as beautiful as our life together. And now, they sit in a box while someone who would actually wear them is being denied access to them. Someone who would actually wear them? Tiffany, you've been in this family for 2 years, and in all that time, you've shown nothing but disdain for our history, our traditions, our values. You've made it clear that you think my life is boring and meaningless, and now you want me to reward that attitude by giving you the most precious things I own. I never said your life was meaningless. You didn't have to say it. It's been clear in every interaction we've had. The way you roll your eyes when I tell stories about David's childhood. The way you change the subject when I talk about family history. The way you've convinced David to skip family gatherings because they're not sophisticated enough for you. That's not fair. What's not fair is you standing in my driveway, insulting my life, and demanding my jewelry. Tiffany's composure cracked completely. Fine. You want to know what I really think? I think you're a lonely old woman who's trying to control people by dangling inheritance over their heads. I think you're using those pieces of jewelry to manipulate David and make him choose between his wife and his mother. The words hit me like a slap, but they also clarified something important. This wasn't about jewelry at all. This was about power and control, and Tiffany's belief that she should be the most important woman in David's life. I'm not making David choose anything, I said calmly. I'm simply keeping my own possessions in my own home until I decide what to do with them. If that threatens you, perhaps you should ask yourself why. It doesn't threaten me, it annoys me. It's petty and selfish, and exactly what I'd expect from someone who's jealous of her son's marriage. Jealous? I almost laughed. Tiffany, I'm not jealous of your marriage. I'm disappointed in it. I'm disappointed that my son married someone who has so little respect for his family that she would stand in his mother's driveway and call her petty and selfish for wanting to keep her own jewelry. Maybe if you acted like a mother instead of a gatekeeper, we wouldn't have this problem. And maybe if you acted like a daughter-in-law instead of an entitled stranger, I'd be more inclined to share family heirlooms with you. We stared at each other for a long moment, the air between us crackling with tension. I could see the calculation in her eyes, the wheels turning as she decided what approach to take next. Finally, she smiled, but it was cold and sharp. You know what? Keep your jewelry. Keep your precious pearls and your dusty old ring and your sentimental bracelet. Sit in your little house and look at them and remember how important you used to be. But don't expect David and me to keep pretending that your feelings matter more than our marriage. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. David is going to have to choose between making his wife happy and catering to his mother's stubbornness, and I think we both know which choice any reasonable man would make. I looked over at David, who was still standing by his car looking like he wanted to disappear entirely. Is that true, David? Are you going to let your wife threaten me with losing you if I don't give her what she wants? David opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, like a fish gasping for air. I just want everyone to get along, he finally managed. Getting along doesn't mean giving in to unreasonable demands, I said. It means treating each other with respect and kindness. It means understanding that some things are more important than social events and showing off. Maybe to you, Tiffany interjected. But some of us have lives that extend beyond sitting at home feeling sorry for ourselves. That was the final straw. Get out, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Get out of my driveway, get off my property, and don't come back until you can treat me with the basic respect that any human being deserves. Gladly, Tiffany said, turning on her heel and stalking back toward her car. David, are you coming? David looked between his wife and his mother, his face a mask of misery and confusion. "David," I said gently, "you don't have to choose between us today, but you do need to decide what kind of man you want to be. The kind who stands by while his wife insults his mother, or the kind who protects the people he loves from cruelty." For a moment, I thought he might stand up to her. I thought he might tell Tiffany that her behavior was unacceptable, that she needed to apologize, that our family deserved better. Instead, he walked to his car without saying a word. I stood in my driveway and watched them drive away, Tiffany's convertible tires squealing slightly as she took the corner too fast. The silence that followed felt both devastating and peaceful. That evening, as I sat in my kitchen eating a simple dinner and thinking about the day's events, I realized something important. I wasn't angry anymore. I was sad for David, sad that he had chosen a woman who brought out the worst in him rather than the best. I was disappointed that my son had so little backbone when it came to standing up for what was right. But I wasn't angry. I was determined. The next morning, I called my lawyer, James Morrison, a man who had handled my family's legal affairs for 20 years. "Evelyn," he said warmly when his secretary put me through. "How are you doing? It's been a while since we've spoken." "I'm doing well, James, but I need to make some changes to my will." "Of course. What kind of changes are we talking about?" I explained the situation with David and Tiffany, the demands for my jewelry, and my concerns about what might happen to my family heirlooms after I was gone. James listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions, his tone growing more serious as I detailed the confrontations of the past few days. "I see," he said when I finished. "And what would you like to do about your estate plan?" "I want to make sure that my jewelry goes to someone who will value it for the right reasons. Someone who understands family history and the importance of preserving it." "Do you have someone specific in mind?" I thought about that question for a long time. Did I have someone who would treasure these pieces the way they deserve to be treasured? "Yes," I said finally. "My great-niece, Sarah. She's always been interested in family history, and she's the kind of person who would understand what these pieces represent." Sarah was my late brother's granddaughter, a 25-year-old teacher who lived 3 states away, but who called me regularly, sent me cards on holidays, and had spent a week with me the previous summer helping me organize old photo albums and listening to family stories with genuine interest. I want to leave the jewelry to Sarah, with a letter explaining the history of each piece. And James, I want to make sure that David and Tiffany understand that their behavior has consequences. What do you mean? I mean that if they're going to treat me like a selfish old woman who's hoarding meaningless trinkets, then they can see what it's like when those meaningless trinkets go to someone who actually appreciates them. James was quiet for a moment. "Evelyn, are you sure about this? Family disputes over inheritance can be very painful, and sometimes people say things in anger that they don't really mean." "James, this isn't about anger. This is about values. This is about making sure that family heirlooms go to someone who will honor them rather than someone who sees them as social accessories." "I understand, but have you considered that David might come around? That he might realize his mistake and apologize? If he does, genuinely and meaningfully, then we can discuss changing the will back. But right now, I need to protect these pieces from people who would diminish their significance." We spent the next hour revising my will, adding specific bequests for each piece of jewelry, including detailed explanations of their history and significance. James also helped me draft a letter to be read to the family after my death, explaining my decisions and hoping that it might serve as a wake-up call about the importance of treating family members with respect. When I left James's office, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. My jewelry was safe in the bank. My will was updated to reflect my values, and I had taken concrete steps to ensure that my family's history would be preserved by someone who truly cared about it. But I wasn't done yet. That afternoon, I called Sarah. "Aunt Evelyn," she said, her voice bright with genuine pleasure. "What a wonderful surprise. How are you doing?" "I'm doing well, sweetheart. I was just thinking about your visit last summer and how much I enjoyed going through those old photo albums with you." "Oh, I love that too. I've been meaning to call you and tell you that I framed that picture of Great-Grandma Rose in her wedding dress. It's hanging in my bedroom, and every time I look at it, I think about the stories you told me about her." My heart swelled. This was exactly what I had hoped for. Exactly the kind of connection to family history that David and Tiffany seemed incapable of understanding. "Sarah, I want you to know how much it means to me that you care about our family stories. So many young people today don't seem interested in the past." "Are you kidding? Those stories are amazing. Great Grandma Rose walking 15 miles to town to buy fabric for her wedding dress. Grandpa Joe working 3 jobs during the Depression to keep the family fed. Your mother hiding her jewelry from burglars by sewing the pieces into the lining of her winter coat. These aren't just stories, Aunt Evelyn. They're proof of how strong our family is." I had to wipe tears from my eyes. "That's exactly right, Sarah. They're proof of strength and love and sacrifice." "Is everything okay, Aunt Evelyn? You sound a little sad." I found myself telling Sarah about the situation with David and Tiffany, about their demands for the jewelry and their dismissal of my feelings. I told her about the confrontations, the hurtful words, and my decision to protect the family heirlooms from people who couldn't appreciate their true value. Sarah listened without interrupting, occasionally making soft sounds of sympathy or outrage. "Oh, Aunt Evelyn," she said when I finished, "I'm so sorry. That must have been heartbreaking." It was, but it also clarified some things for me. It helped me understand the difference between people who see these pieces as jewelry and people who see them as family history. I can't imagine treating family heirlooms like they're just expensive accessories. When you showed me Great-Grandma's pearls last summer, I could practically feel all the Sunday mornings she wore them to church, all the special occasions where she felt beautiful and loved. That's exactly what they represent, Sarah. Love made tangible. Have you heard from David since the argument? No, and I'm not sure I will, at least not until Tiffany decides she wants something else from me. Maybe he'll come to his senses. Maybe he'll realize how unfairly he treated you. Maybe, but even if he does, the damage is done. I know now how he really sees me, how little my feelings matter to him when they conflict with his wife's wants. That's his loss, Aunt Evelyn. You're an amazing woman with incredible stories and so much wisdom. If he can't see that, it's because he's chosen not to look. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house and felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Hope that family history would continue to matter to someone. Hope that the sacrifices and dreams represented by my jewelry would be honored and preserved. Hope that love could still triumph over greed and selfishness. 3 weeks passed without a word from David or Tiffany. No phone calls, no visits, no attempts to apologize or reconcile. I went about my daily life, tending my garden, reading my books, visiting with neighbors, and slowly adjusting to the reality that my relationship with my son might be permanently damaged. Then, on a Thursday morning in late September, David showed up at my door. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't been sleeping well. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, "can we talk?" I studied his face, looking for signs of genuine remorse or just another attempt to manipulate me into giving him what he wanted. "That depends," I said. "Are you here to apologize, or are you here to try a different approach to getting my jewelry?" "I'm here to apologize, really apologize, for everything." I stepped aside and let him into the house, leading him to the living room where this whole mess had started. "Tiffany doesn't know I'm here," he said without preamble. "She thinks I'm at work." I see. Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking since our fight. About what you said, about the kind of man I want to be, about what's really important. And what conclusion have you reached? David ran his hands through his hair, that familiar gesture of frustration, but this time it seemed directed at himself rather than at me. I've been a terrible son, he said quietly. I let Tiffany convince me that your feelings didn't matter as much as her wants. I let her turn me into someone who could look at his own mother and call her selfish for wanting to keep her own possessions. You did. I know, and I'm ashamed of myself. I'm ashamed that I stood in your driveway and let my wife insult you. I'm ashamed that I made you feel like your life wasn't valuable enough to deserve beautiful things. I'm ashamed that I forgot everything you taught me about respect and kindness and family loyalty. I waited for him to continue, not ready to make this easy for him, but willing to listen. I keep thinking about what you said, about Dad working overtime to buy you that bracelet, about how he told you it matched your eyes when you laughed. I remember him saying that, Mom. I was probably 12 or 13, and I remember thinking how much he loved you, how much he wanted to make you happy. David's voice cracked slightly. And then I grew up and married someone who convinced me that your happiness didn't matter as much as hers. Someone who made me forget that the reason Dad worked so hard was because making the people you love feel special is one of the most important things you can do. What changed? I asked. What made you realize this? David was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Last week, Tiffany's grandmother died, he said finally. And at the funeral, Tiffany's mother gave her a locket that had belonged to her great-grandmother. It wasn't particularly valuable, just a simple gold locket with a tiny photo inside. But Tiffany cried when she received it. She cried and talked about how much it meant to her to have something that connected her to her family history. I felt a chill of understanding. And then I realized what a hypocrite I'd been. How I demanded that you give up your family heirlooms while understanding perfectly well why Tiffany would treasure hers. Did you tell her about the irony? I tried to. I suggested that maybe she could understand now why you wanted to keep your jewelry. I thought she'd have some moment of recognition, some understanding of how wrong we'd been. But she didn't. She got angry. She said it was completely different because her locket wasn't worth much money and wasn't the kind of thing that should be worn to important events. She said your jewelry was too valuable to sit in a drawer when it could be making a statement at social functions. David looked up at me, his eyes filled with something that might have been the beginning of wisdom. That's when I realized that she didn't get it at all, that she'd never gotten it, that to her, the value of jewelry isn't in what it represents, but in how much it impresses other people. And that bothered you? It horrified me because I realized that I'd been thinking the same way, that I'd lost sight of what really matters, that I'd become someone who could look at 3 generations of family love and see nothing but expensive accessories. We sat in silence for several minutes. I could see David struggling with something, working up the courage to say whatever came next. Mom, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I said things that can't be unsaid and did things that can't be undone. But I want you to know that I understand now. I understand why those pieces matter to you. I understand that asking you to give them away was like asking you to give away pieces of your heart. It was exactly like that. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Not because I want you to change your mind about the jewelry, but because I hurt someone I love. Because I forgot who raised me and what values you tried to instill in me. Because I became someone you couldn't be proud of. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with regret and the hope of redemption. David, I said gently, I need you to understand something. This was never really about the jewelry. This was about respect. This was about whether you saw me as a person with feelings that mattered or just an obstacle to getting what Tiffany wanted. I know that now. Do you? Because I need to know that if we repair our relationship, it won't happen again. I need to know that the next time Tiffany wants something from me, you won't automatically assume that her desires trump my feelings. David nodded earnestly. It won't happen again, I promise. What about Tiffany? Has she had any kind of realization about how she treated me? David's face fell. No, she's still angry that you wouldn't give her the jewelry. She's still convinced that you're being unreasonable and selfish. Then how can we move forward? How can we have a relationship when your wife fundamentally disrespects me? I don't know, David admitted. I'm hoping that if I change, if I start standing up for you instead of going along with her demands, maybe she'll change too. And if she doesn't? David was quiet for a long time. Then I guess I'll have to decide what's more important to me. Having a wife who makes me into someone I don't respect, or having a family that I can be proud to belong to. It wasn't a complete answer, but it was a start. It was the first sign that David might be willing to put his family values ahead of Tiffany's social ambitions. I've already made some changes to my will, I said quietly. David's face went pale. Mom, the jewelry is going to Sarah. She's the only person in this family who seems to understand what it represents. I understand now. Do you, or do you understand now because you want something from me? I understand because I finally listened to what you were trying to tell me, because I finally saw past my own selfishness to recognize the pain I was causing someone I love. I studied my son's face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. What I saw instead was genuine remorse and the kind of shame that comes from recognizing your own moral failures. The will isn't set in stone, I said finally. If you can show me that you've truly changed, if you can prove that you understand the difference between wanting and deserving, if you can stand up to Tiffany when she tries to treat me poorly, then we can discuss changing it back. What would I need to do? Be the man I raised you to be. Be someone who protects the people he loves, instead of sacrificing them for social approval. Be someone who values family history and respects the sacrifices that came before him. David nodded, tears in his eyes. I can do that. I want to do that. Then prove it. Not with words, but with actions. Show me that my feelings matter to you. Show me that you understand why family heirlooms are sacred. Show me that you're willing to stand up to your wife when she's wrong. I will. I promise I will. And David? The next time Tiffany insults me or dismisses my feelings or treats me like an inconvenience, I expect you to defend me. Not later, in private, but in the moment. I expect you to make it clear that disrespecting your mother is not acceptable. I understand. Because if you can't do that, if you can't protect me from cruelty in my own family, then we don't really have a relationship worth preserving. David stood up, looking somehow both younger and older than when he'd arrived. Thank you for giving me another chance, he said. I know I don't deserve it. You don't, I agreed, but I love you, and I'm hoping that love will be enough to help you find your way back to being the man I raised you to be. After David left, I sat in my quiet house and wondered if I'd done the right thing. Part of me wanted to believe that he had genuinely changed, that he'd learned something important about respect and family and what really matters in life. But another part of me knew that real change takes time, and that the true test would come the next time Tiffany decided she wanted something from me. Only time would tell whether my son had truly found his way back to his values, or whether this was just another strategy to get what his wife wanted. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. Hope that family could still matter more than social climbing. Hope that love could still triumph over greed. Hope that the values I tried to instill in my son weren't completely lost. My jewelry remained safely locked away in the bank. My will remained unchanged, and my boundaries remained firm. But my heart was slightly more open to the possibility that some wounds could heal, that some relationships could be repaired, and that some people could learn to choose love over selfishness. Whether David would prove worthy of that hope remained to be seen, but I was willing to give him the chance to try.